Hi guys, welcome back. In today's video I'll be showing you how I made this beautiful corset dress with lace combination. This video is in two parts. I already uploaded the first part where I cut and sew the top part of this dress. I'll be dropping a link to that in the description so you can go watch that before you join us on this video. On today's video I'll be showing you how to cut and sew the lower part of this dress, which is the skirt part, and also how to attach it to the top part of the dress. If this looks like what you want to learn how to make, then you want to keep watching this video and let's get started. Like I said, in this video we're going to be cutting the lower part and also sewing it and attaching it to the top part that we had already made. So I've gone ahead to trim the top part of my folded fabric, and to determine the width of your fold, just go ahead to divide your hip measurement by 4 and then add your sewing allowance. So I used 2 inches for my sewing allowance, so I divided my hip measurement by 4 and then I added 2 inches. That is how wide my folded fabric is. So for the length of the dress, I'm working with 58 inches and I'm going to add extra 2 inches to that to give 60 inches, and then I'm going to trim off the excess. And then watch carefully to see how I place my tape. I subtracted the half length I'm working with, and then I was able to get the full length of the dress. So the next thing I'm going to do on this folded part, I'm going to place my tape and mark the waist measurement I'm working with divided by 4, and then I added 1 inch for that and then 2 inches for sewing allowance, and then I went ahead to mark hip measurements divided by 4 on the hip line, which is 9 inches from the waistline, and then I added 2 inches allowance to that as well. So the dart measurement that I took initially for the front part, I'm going to be trimming it off later on in the video. So the next thing I did was to place my tape on the waistline, okay, subtracting my half length, and then I marked the knee line of the measurement I am working with, and the shoulder to knee for this particular measurement is 39. I went up by 3 inches and then I marked that line, and then I went ahead to measure what I have on the hip line. That's about 11. I'm going to subtract 1.5 from that to get 9.5. I marked that on the 3 inches I went up by from the knee line, and then I'll be extending the same measurement to the hem line of this dress. So I'll just go ahead to connect that with a straight line, and that is all for the measurement of the front part of the skirt. We'll just go ahead to cut this out. If you are new to this channel and you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Please do well to hit on the subscribe button, and also do not forget to give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful. Next, I am going to introduce another fabric, and I'm going to be folding it into two. We are going to be using this to cut the back, and this is going to be wider than the front by about 2 inches thereabout. So I also went ahead to mark the wrong side, so I'll be able to know the wrong side of my fabric. So I placed the front on it, making sure that it lays well. I'm going to be trimming the top part as well, the same way I did for the front. So I'll just trim off the edge, and then I'll just go ahead to make my markings. And for this back part, we're going to be adding zip allowance. So we are going to be marking the waist to the hip line, and then on the hip line I marked 2 inches, and then on the waistline I marked 1.5 inches. Okay, so I noticed that I didn't have enough space to mark my 2 inches, so I shifted the front and then I marked my 2 inches, and then on the waistline I marked 1.5 inch, and then on the knee line I went ahead to mark 1.5 inch as well, all the way to the hem. So I connected what I marked from the hip line to the knee line, and then all the way to the hem of the dress. So for the other side of the back, we are just going to be cutting out the same thing that we have on the front. The back slit for this dress is going to be around 4 inches above the knee line, but we are going to be doing that after sewing. Okay, so we are going to be doing that after sewing the dress. So I'm just showing you guys where the slit of this dress is going to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is to cut this out. Watch carefully to see how I am going to be cutting it. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for stopping by. Please do not forget to turn on notification bell to get notified each time I post a new video. Next, I am going to be making a notch on the zip allowance side just to know where my zip is going to be, and then I'll also make a notch on the dart line to know where my dart is going to be. For this particular dress, I will only take a dart at the back. I'm not going to be taking any dart on the front part of this piece, and like I said earlier, I will be trimming off the dart allowance that I had taken for the front. So guys, after cutting, the next thing I went ahead to do is to cut a lining piece, and my lining piece is exact same thing I have on my fabric. Okay, I just went ahead to cut the same thing I have on the main piece, that's for the front and the back, and then I'm just going to place it together, making sure that it matches, and then I'm going to be trimming off about 1 inch from the lining, 1 inch or 1.5 inch thereabout, depending on the length that you are working with. So if you have enough fabric and you added more allowance on the lower part, you can go ahead to trim more from your lining. But I went ahead to trim just 1.5 inch from my lining, and then after trimming it off, I'm going to be joining this now to the main dress. But before we do that, we are going to go ahead and reduce about 1 inch from the back side of the dress. Okay, so this is the center back of the dress where the zipper is going to be. I went ahead to trim off about 1 inch so that it relaxes well. So I just trim that off and then slant it into the waistline, and then after that, the next thing we are going to do is to cut out the front skirt. That's the second skirt on the front. There are actually two, one is laying on the other, so I'm going to be cutting the other one now, and the other one is shorter, so we are going to be cutting that one. So I went ahead to fold my fabric into two, and then I'm going to be placing the main front piece on this piece, and then I will mark where I want it to stop at. So for this particular one, I wanted it to stop at about 4 inches above the knee line. So I placed it on the 4 inches above the knee line that I had marked, and then I went ahead to cut out exactly what I have on this piece. And then for the center front, I wanted it to be a little bit below the hip line, about 1 or 2 inches below the hip line. So I also went ahead to mark what I wanted for the center front as well. So after carefully placing this, I'll go ahead to mark where I want the center front to stop, and like I said, about 1 or 2 inches below the hip line. This is around 10 thereabout. That's for the center front. But later on, I went ahead to add it. So I added extra 1 inch to this piece because I felt like what I cut was too short. So I added extra 1 inch to what I have here. So I went ahead to trim this. I trimmed exactly what I have, like I said. And then after trimming, I'm going to be taking out the front piece. That's the main skirt. I'll be taking that out. And then I'm going to also take out the dart. Before I take it out, I'm going to be taking out the dart, and like I said earlier, the front part is not going to be having any dart, so I'm going to be cutting off the dart from this piece. Okay, so remember to also cut it out from the lining as well, because we already cut out the lining. I'll also be trimming off the dart from the lining. And then I went ahead to mark the wrong side of the fabric, and then I marked how deep I wanted the front to be, and then I went ahead to cut out. And remember, I said I marked 10 inches here, but I went ahead to cut another piece because I felt like this was too short. So if you are doing yours, you can go ahead to use 11 or 12 inches for yours, and then for the side as well, I added about 1 or 2 inches. So what made me add mine was that I realized that after joining it, it did not stop around the 4 inches above the knee line I wanted it to stop. It went up more than what I wanted because of the slant that I slanted it. That was why I decided to add about 2 inches, either 1 or 2 inches, to what I had. So next thing to do is to cut out a lining, and it has to be the same with the main piece. So after cutting out the lining, I'll just go ahead to turn the lining with the main piece. I'll be doing it for all the pieces, that's the front and also the back. And I'll be turning the lining on the front, that's the main piece of the front, before I cut out my lace piece. So please take note of that. And my lace piece is going to be about 2 inches above the center front of the second front piece that we have. That's the short front piece that we have. My lace is going to be measuring about 2 inches above it. So like I said, before I cut out my lace, I went ahead to turn the lining for all my pieces. I went ahead to turn it for the front, the main piece of the front, the back pieces, and also the short piece of the front. So I'm just going to do that and come and show you guys how it looks. If you have any questions, please do not forget to drop your questions in the comments, and also please do not forget to give this video a thumbs up if you find it helpful. So after turning my lining, I'll just go ahead to notch on the sharp edge here, just notch on it, that V shaped part, and then I'll go ahead to sew the sides by 1/2 inch. I'll be sewing both sides by 1/2 inch, and then after that I'm going to be flipping this over, and then I will give it a good press. So this is the back piece. I've gone ahead to sew on the lower part. I joined the lining to the main piece by 1/2 inch, and then I top stitched, and then now I'm going to be sewing the sides by 1/2 inch from the top part all the way down, and then from this other top part as well all the way down. And then this is the short part of our front piece, and I've gone ahead to sew it. I just went ahead to trim off the sharp corners, and then I'll be flipping it over, and like I said, I gave it a good press. And then this is the back, and you can see why we had reduced our lining. You can now see why we did that. And then I'll go ahead to also flip this over, and then I am going to give it a good press as well. I repeated the same step for the other piece of the back and also the front as well. So this is why we cut our lining shorter, so that the lining is not going to be showing on the lower part of the dress. And then the next thing I did was to fold my front piece into two, because I have already turned it with the lining, so I can now cut out my lace. So I'm just marking where I want my lace to stop at, and like I said, it's supposed to be about 2 inches above the center front of the short part of the skirt, so that it doesn't show after joining. So I went ahead to fold my lace into two, making sure that the side that has that fine edge is on the lower part, that's the edge of the lace. And then I place my front piece on it, and then I'm just going to be cutting exactly what I have on my front piece all the way to the part that I marked. And then when I get there, I'll just take out my front piece and then cut it straight. And then I am going to be attaching this to the skirt using a hemming gum. So if you're using a hemming gum, make sure that you press it very well. Okay, you can place a piece of fabric on your lace on top of it before you press, but make sure you use your seam iron to press it very well, so that your hemming gum won't be visible afterwards. And then after pressing with my hemming gum, I'm still going to sew it. Okay, I'm going to sew on the sides, and then on the top part as well I'm going to be sewing it. And then after that, I will now place the short part of the skirt on it and sew it. So this is how it looks after using my hemming gum. I'll go ahead to trim off the excess. Okay, so just see how I flipped this and trimmed off the excess. I'll repeat the same on the other side as well. And then like I said, I'll go ahead and sew the top part, and then I'm going to attach the short part of the skirt on it, and then I'm going to be attaching it, holding it down by sewing the sides together. Okay, I'll sew the both sides together to hold it down to the main skirt piece. And then after that, the next thing we are going to do now is to to cut our sleeve. And for the sleeve, I am going to be cutting one piece first, and then I'll place it on the other and cut out exactly what I cut. So this is on fold. I went ahead to measure the long sleeve length I am working with, and then I trimmed off the excess, and then I'll go ahead to cut out my sleeve. I have a detailed tutorial on how to cut a sleeve. I'll be linking that in the description, so if you do not know how to cut a sleeve, you can go and watch that video so that you can understand better. I had to rush this because I had limited time to deliver this particular dress, and so I rushed my sleeve cutting. And like I said, the link will be in the description, so you can go watch that and understand how to cut a sleeve better. I'll also be dropping a link to the video on how to fix eyelets. So if you want to fix eyelets on your dress, you can go watch that video to understand better. This is the top part that we had already cut and sewn in our previous video. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to place the front part on the front of this top part and then join it together, and then I'll repeat the same on the back as well. So I'm just going to be sewing by 1/2 inch, and then for the lower part of my skirt for the back, I'll go ahead to take my dart before I join it to the back part of the top part of this dress. So you can see I've gone ahead to join the front, and this is how it looks. And then I've gone ahead to also join the back, and this is how it looks. I'll just go ahead now to sew this extra part here. I'll just fold it inwards like this, and then I'm going to sew on it, and I'll repeat the same step for the other side as well. And then I'll go ahead to close up the back. And for the back, I'm going to be sewing it all the way to the point where we want the slit to be, like I said, 4 inches above the knee line. And then I'm going to attach my zipper, and then I'm going to confirm my body measurements and then close up the sides. I attached my sleeves off camera because I had limited time to deliver this dress. After everything, this is how it looks. Thank you all for watching. Bye. See you in my next one.